When I was coming to the end of production on the Danger Element, running up to about 2011, I started to become very aware that something was physically wrong with me, especially when we were shooting that last big fight. You could even see in some of the raw footage that I was visibly in pain. I don't know that anybody else could tell, but I could certainly see it. At the time, I thought it could be some kind of arthritis or something. As I went into post production on The Danger Element and progressed into my 30s, I developed severe pain throughout my body. Like literally every joint was in severe pain. And I couldn't exercise anymore. I couldn't practice kung fu anymore. I was eventually diagnosed with major depressive disorder, which was causing memory issues and also this mysterious severe pain throughout my body. And I eventually did find treatment that worked. But by the time all this stuff kind of got stabilized and everything was figured out, I had already lost about a decade to this illness. I hadn't been able to exercise or practice martial art in any way for about 10 years. So I basically lost my 30s to this disease. Not to say that, good things didn't happen during that time, but a lot of the things that I had built up throughout my 20s were lost to this decade. A lot of the skills that I had. Now that I'm finally doing better and I want to do another action film, I felt the need to do something to start to get back in shape and to regain some of the skills that I had lost. I wasn't sure where to start, really, but I settled pretty quickly on a Shaolin form called Sisan Chuan, or 13 Fists. This form is kind of a beginner Shaolin form, and it's ideal for people with limited mobility and body pain, and things like this. This is not to say that the form is excessively easy to learn or even to do, but it is a pretty good entry point back into Kung Fu for somebody like me. There are a few reasons I like Shaolin forms personally. One of them is the style of choreography that I do for cinema. The secret to why it tends to look good is precision of movement. It doesn't have as much to do with flashy movements or particular movements or even speed. It has to do with a commitment to land in each shape precisely so that the audience can sort of follow it and it feels precise and it feels very clean. It could actually be done at slow speeds, at fast speeds, and it tends not to matter so much as long as you hit that precise mark. And that's kind of the secret to why it looks good on camera. And Shaolin forms are very good for conditioning this kind of movement, because you really have to hit those shapes precisely and not stumble and not hesitate. You got to hit them and hold them, move to the next one. There's nothing in between. There's no hesitation or stuttering. So movie choreography, particularly the Hong Kong style, benefits greatly from practicing these forms, if only for that reason. I think something else I really appreciate about Shaolin Kung Fu is that it's spent about 1,500 years within the Shaolin monastic tradition. And during that time, these martial forms have integrated themselves into the religious monastic practice of the Shaolin monks. I'm not a Buddhist, I'm a Catholic, but a lot of the practices, especially monastic practices in Buddhism and Catholicism, overlap. We don't have the same focus, but the practices themselves aren't all that different. For instance, Catholics did not invent the practice of using beads for enumeration. But when you use the beads to enumerate meditations on the life of Christ through the eyes of his mother, it becomes a uniquely Catholic practice. So it's easy to see Shaolin Kung Fu forms as action meditations adaptable to my own religious practice, in the same way that some other monastic practices overlap between Chan Buddhism and Catholicism. There's a lot that I think is misunderstood about Shaolin forms, and was even misunderstood by me for many years. So I like to try to demystify the concept whenever I get the chance. If the techniques that you saw in a Shaolin form were applied in a real combat situation, it would not look like what you see in the form. There actually is an applied techniques study in Shaolin that's called Senda. And if you look at this, it looks a lot like kickboxing with some grappling. It's even, more like MMA almost. There's broken rhythms, there's uncertainty, there's non-committal movements, much like you'd see in a boxing match or a real street fight. Then the principles of Senda are explored through sparring. So combat against a resisting opponent. It's really a misconception that comes from movies and, frankly, con artists, that a Shaolin fight would look like a form. Obviously, the movies make it look like this. And a lot of people actually believe this, even practitioners of Shaolin Kung Fu in the modern Western world. I like to think of the forms as to fighting in the same way a scale is to a musician. The musician does not go on stage and play you a scale. But it's very likely that a good musician knows their scales, and they may have even sung or played their scales right off stage, right before they came on. The scales are not necessarily applied in the performance per se, but they are, in a sense, benefiting the performance. And this is the same way I think of Shaolin forms. You're not going to do a form in a fight. You're not even going to do some of these stances in a fight. That's not really what their purpose is. But in some sense, they contribute to your ability in other ways. Similarly, when you see a Kung Fu practitioner do a form, you might see elements of techniques that would be used in a real combat situation, but not in the same way. Oftentimes in the form, the movements are exaggerated. What you're doing is you're building strength, you're training yourself to go further. If you train a big movement, in the fight, you can do a small movement with more power. It's a fairly simple idea. Through this lens, you start to realize that the forms don't have to be as frightening and mystical and intimidating as they've been made out to be. In fact, depending on who you learn any one form from, the forms can vary a little bit. And that's okay. You can modify the forms. You can create new forms. You can customize a form just for you, maybe because of your ability or disability or some particular skill you're trying to develop. This is where I think there's some misunderstanding with Bruce Lee. I love Bruce Lee, of course. I think Bruce Lee is responsible for the collision of philosophy and action.
It is like a finger pointing away to the moon. Don't concentrate on the finger or you will miss all that heavenly glory.
We're all here to do what we're all here to do.
That I tried to emulate in my own film, The Danger Element.
The universe is far from simple. All the less simple is its creator.
But I do think that he sort of misrepresented traditional martial art forms, and maybe this was unintentional. But I think some of the things he said confused entire generations about what Shaolin forms were for and what some of the other traditional Chinese martial art styles and forms were actually for. But, in short, to say that a Shaolin form is useless in a real combat situation is a little bit like saying that a treadmill is useless in a foot race. It's an oversimplification. I don't like to let people see me doing the forms. In fact, no one's ever seen me do a form before now. But in re-entering this practice and realizing how good it's been to me in the past and how good it's being to me now and how much it's helping me to make progress, I felt like I should share it a little bit, if only to demystify the whole concept and maybe make it a little less intimidating. Because these are treasures of humanity that have been preserved over many hundreds of years at great cost. And the people who did this, they did this for you. This is your story too.